Live everywhere on netrootsradio.com. David Waldman, Kagro, in the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Well, okay, here I am. Hi, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, June 4th, not July 4th, but June 4th, 2021. In a month from now, we'll be back and celebrating Independence Day, I suppose, if we're allowed to. Remember that the conservatives are pretty sure that Joe Biden is going to somehow forbid it, or you're going to have to ask for his express written permission in order for you to recognize the independence of the United States, much less have a barbecue in your backyard. But guess what? It sounds like things are on track for us to have those small and even large gatherings. There's no prohibition in most states. I don't think, certainly not here in Virginia, against large outdoor gatherings. And I actually have seen on Twitter and other social media conservatives, I guess, trying to position themselves to attack this new reality, saying, don't you remember when a few months ago Joe Biden was very cautiously saying that maybe you could possibly get permission, if we were good until then, to get together for a 4th of July barbecue or a small gathering to celebrate the day with your family. And look now we're going to be able to get together in large numbers or even have fireworks. So isn't that a huge failure on the part of Joe Biden? They're actually trying to spin this as some sort of huge failure, that he was a big doomsayer, but look, he was wrong the whole time, and yada yada, and I don't know, somehow his failure to guess at an earlier date that by July 4th we'd be in much better shape, I guess thanks largely to his leadership in distributing the vaccine and encouraging people to get it and making sure it was available for people wherever they wanted it, and modeling the appropriate behavior with masking, et cetera, and then in later stages giving people who were vaccine hesitant, if not anti-vaccine, but vaccine hesitant, reason to want to be vaccinated so that you could join in these celebrations. Somehow, however, this is a huge fault of his, and I don't know what to tell you. People want to blame something, and there's nothing to blame on anybody. They want to just turn something, all right, okay, that's your pastime, that's fine. I just thought it was interesting in passing to note that was the case. And now we'll pass on it and move on. Bill in Portland, Maine has become aware recently that the show is on the air. This is good. The Kagro in the Morning radio show is live now. This is all true. Kagro X, me, David Waldman. Hi, how are you? Good to meet you. In case this is your first time somehow stumbling onto the show, you were just walking around the internet and boom, here we were. Well, here's what's up for the day. Not really, of course. It's just a stab in the dark, but sometimes it's a good theme. Maybe we'll just follow it. Sometimes we just do these things because people tell us to. Just like I understand certain liberal writers out there on the internets are insisting that they have turned into right-wing reactionary / Nazis because people have said that they were those things. And now, just to prove that they were right or possibly wrong about it, they were going to be those things. Let's see what I'm going to become. Let's see. Kagro X breaks major news this morning. That's true. I'm sorry about that. It was an accident. Jimmy Carter will be reinstated as president in September. This is good news. Knocking out Donald Trump, who will be reinstated in August. It's going to get crazy. I'm for that. I 100% endorse that idea, especially if he is going to actually knock out Donald Trump. I think he's thinking metaphorically. I'd like to see it actually happen, and that would improve the habitat for humanity vastly, I think. Actually, there's a video circulating that demonstrates the principle quite neatly. There are still people out there in the world, I guess. I don't really know how old the video is. I'll have to dig it up, because I didn't put it aside as an important video to share with everybody or anything, but it now occurs to me, because we're talking about him knocking out Donald Trump and meaning it. There's another video circulating of what looks to be a confrontation. It's definitely a confrontation. It's a confrontation that looks to be at Walmart. That's the part I'm guessing about. in which I guess a Walmart shopper who was not giving attention when they said, attention Walmart shoppers, you got to follow our mask policy. And I don't even know if they have a mask policy anymore. They may have dropped it. That's what makes me think it might be an older video. But I guess just unhappy at having been directed to do something. Well, I guess we're supposed to guess it's masking. I don't really know what it is. It doesn't really matter. But having been approached by a Walmart employee for some reason, then begins ramming this employee with their shopping cart. Pretty full, and so I'm sure pretty heavy and pretty uncomfortable. And the employee makes it pretty clear that he's uncomfortable being rammed by this shopping cart. And when the customer goes to leave, having, I guess, sufficiently rammed the Walmart employee, the Walmart employee says, nah, we're not actually done with this confrontation. I'm coming after you. One other employee does what I guess is, at a certain level, the right thing. Tries to stop the employee from continuing the confrontation. Probably smart because, of course, at that point, you can be pretty sure that the employee is going to get fired no matter what they do. But this employee is having none of it and wriggles free from, maybe we'll say half-hearted attempt at stopping him, and then just clocks this shopper. The camera doesn't actually capture the punch. It's bystander, iPhone video. And, okay, the camera work leaves something to be desired. But he just punches this guy, and then the next thing you see as the camera finally shifts to put everything in frame is the guy just flopping over like cartoon style. And I guess he was knocked out cold right there on the floor of Walmart. And it's hard not to endorse this kind of behavior, even though you're not supposed to do it. And so, ready? We're not doing it. There you go. Don't punch people for, whatever. Just generally speaking, that should be the rule. Begin with that. And there are a number of exceptions that we'll entertain on a individual level, on a case-by-case basis. But, yeah, now I can't find the thing. I'm sure I retweeted it in the last couple of days, too. So, well, we'll see if we can dig it up. Note to self, find video of Jimmy Carter punching, if you can find it, punching Trump. Now, that's not really what happened, but that's the note I'm going to write to myself. It's a good topic, Bill, and a great idea. I don't know if you saw this thing. Anyway, news here is don't ram anyone with shopping carts. Don't punch anybody. The mask mandate is over. Don't punch anybody for any reason, except if there's a really good one and you can convince me later on. But don't do it without prior written permission from me. And you're not going to get that. So, all right, let's see. Moving on to other topics, we can. How will we approach this Friday? There's no real plan just yet, and there rarely is one. I think that usually emerges from the stories that we've put aside. There we go. Thanks very much. Mad Hatter has provided us with the video. He knows exactly what we're talking about. And you'll find it with the KITM hashtag. My hands aren't even dirty. I didn't even distribute it, but it's KITM hashtag. You can go and look for it. And, wow. Walmart Englewood is what it says in this one. I don't know if the film is exactly the same or a better version or a worse version for that matter, but I think it certainly appears to be the same one. Is this date stamped in any way? I don't know what's on this version. I shouldn't be distracting myself trying to look at this, but this one gets all sorts of additional commentary. I think it's actually a clearer video. Maybe the one I saw, they blurred out the face of the employee, I guess to protect them, which I don't know what to tell you. The guy didn't really want any protecting. Yep, well, that's the one. I got to tell you, it looks almost staged the way the guy collapses, but if it's staged, bravo! I truly enjoyed it. So, okay, thanks to Elrond50. If you're looking for Mad Hatter and you don't know exactly where to find him just yet, that's the answer via Twitter. And now we'll see whether a theme emerged unconsciously through my selective pocketing of stories and or retweeting of them on Twitter. All right, let's see. What have we in store for you today? There's plenty to get to today. Let me go to some of the longer reads, perhaps, and begin with those so that we can be sure to get those in. The latest on the reconciliation situation. Perhaps that's still confusing some of you. It still confuses everyone in Congress, including the parliamentarian. So I thought we would take a look at what was written up in roll call. I think we still have the situation pretty well in hand in terms of understanding it. The parliamentarian is having second thoughts, as I thought she might, about turning loose unlimited use of reconciliation based on the passage of revised budget resolutions. Like I said, I'm not surprised that the ruling, such as it is, I guess it's not really a ruling yet, but an opinion, that would require the actual passage of a brand new or revised version of the budget resolution. I always figured that was going to be a requirement for the use of any reconciliation bills, because you can't, what makes a bill a reconciliation bill and therefore entitled to this preferential treatment on the floor is that it's being considered pursuant to instructions, reconciliation instructions, and reconciliation instructions can only be formally proposed in a budget resolution. And if the budget resolution you've passed doesn't have those instructions in it, you can't use reconciliation to do the things you're trying to do. So you would have to put it in a new document, and that would be a budget resolution revision of some kind. So yeah, if anyone was caught by surprise, and it seemed from the way the writing was done, like some of the reporters who maybe aren't as familiar with the procedure, they may have been caught by surprise, this idea that you would have to repass a budget resolution in order to use reconciliation, I thought was kind of obvious. And, it may be the case that the parliamentarians' position on this stuff has never changed. And what actually changed was the parliamentarian getting wind from reporters that they thought that they could just automatically restart the reconciliation process without some new resolution passing. And they said, no, that's not the case, and nobody ever thought so. Although, who knows? Maybe there were senators who thought so. Anyway, roll call wrote up something on the subject just the other day. Parliamentarian guidance deals blow to reconciliation strategy, but I'm not certain that it does. Senate Rules referee says use of special procedure to pass multiple filibuster-proof bills should be reserved for extraordinary circumstances. Oh, the reappearance of the extraordinary circumstances phrasing in the filibuster context, no less. You might recall that I think extraordinary circumstances was the out clause, the escape clause from the old Gang of 14 agreement back in 2005, whereby, Republicans agreed not to use the nuclear option to change filibuster procedure rules if Democrats likewise would simply promise never to use the filibuster, at least on judicial nominations. And that way they would absolve the Republicans of the need to use the nuclear option. It was a lousy deal. But what can you do? To no one's surprise. Anyway, let's see what's in the body of the article here. Written by Paul M. Krawzak, if I have the pronunciation right, Krawzak. Using a revised budget resolution to take an extra crack at reconciliation to advance Democratic priorities through the Senate appears unlikely during this Congress, given a new opinion from the Senate parliamentarian. Although you should remember from our earlier coverage on the subject that it was always considered somewhat unlikely that they would do this. Even when they got the first set of guidance, as we won't call it a ruling, the first round of guidance from the parliamentarian made it clear that it was something that was possible to do. It was still a couple weeks later that we found out that Senate Democrats were backing away from any enthusiastic endorsement of using it, at the very least, and were saying that possibly it just wasn't going to happen. And then a couple weeks after that, it became, we don't think the timing works out all that well. By the time we got around to passing a revised budget resolution, issuing reconciliation instructions, and then followed those instructions and then brought a reconciliation bill to the floor, it would be almost time for us to pass a new budget resolution anyway. And so there would be very little point in our going ahead with this. Nevertheless, they decided to pile on, and in this new announcement, the press is taking it as, the severe blow dealt to the absolutely concrete plans by Democrats to totally do this like 15 times. And there really weren't any such plans. It was floated as an idea, and it was a good idea, and I'm glad they hashed this out, but it never really got to the point where Dems have had a concrete plan to go ahead with this. So for them to not go ahead with it isn't really a blow to their plans. Or how do they put it? Deals a blow to reconciliation strategy. Well, strategy maybe. All right, the new guidance issued to Senate staff on Friday, that would be last Friday, not today, suggests that Democrats will get just one more try this year to pass a filibuster-proof legislative package to enact additional priorities ranging from infrastructure to immigration policy proposed by President Joe Biden and party leaders on Capitol Hill. They probably won't even take that just one try. And again, here the phrasing is as if there was a fight over the number of tries they would get, number of times they could try to pass a reconciliation bill. And that was just never the issue. But okay, if they want to use reconciliation yet again, they'll need to adopt a fiscal 2023 budget resolution next year, but would only likely get one shot then as well. I don't know what it is, but I guess there's just this fixation among Capitol Hill reporters on the idea that there's a definite number of reconciliation bills that can result from one budget resolution, and it just isn't the case. I really don't know why they're so hung up on it, but okay, we'll leave it for now. Senate parliamentarian Elizabeth McDonough's 4-page opinion makes clear her view, what the framers, they get to be framers, even though it happened in 1974. That seems like a long time ago, but it ain't no 1776, which wouldn't make any sense anyway since they didn't frame anything. We usually use that with respect to framing of the Constitution. That would have been 1787, but okay, whatever. Senate parliamentarian says that the framers of the 1974 law establishing the modern budget process, the Congressional Budget Act, didn't intend for lawmakers to be able to use the budget reconciliation process as many times as they could jam into a given year. True. But again, that's because it was never about the number of reconciliation bills. It was about what you did with them. And they did intend to give congressional leaders the opportunity to pass more than one reconciliation bill. They just, didn't. I don't know. They didn't. They certainly didn't express in any overt way a preference for one versus multiple reconciliation bills, but they left the door open by, enumerating 4 different instances in which reconciliation could be used. And so one would think that they were open to at least 4 reconciliation bills possibly being passed in a single calendar year, but probably knew very well by then that it was more likely that they would consolidate the multiple bills, if there were any, into one and only deal with reconciliation once. But okay. Moving on. Let's see. In addition, she, the parliamentarian, wrote that a revised budget resolution with additional reconciliation instructions can't automatically be discharged to the floor in the absence of a Senate budget panel markup. Okay, that seems news. That's in contrast to a regular budget resolution, which can be brought up any time on the floor after April 1st if the committee hasn't acted. Okay, now that's real news. In other words, that if they decided to revise the budget and pass a new resolution that included reconciliation instructions, or didn't, for that matter, but as long as it's a new budget resolution. The budget committee would have to meet, mark it up, and report it out to the floor, or at least attempt to report it out to the floor. Whereas, and that's a problem because, of course, we were talking about a 50-50 deadlocked Senate and then presumably an evenly divided budget committee as well. And under normal circumstances, an evenly divided committee, usually by the rules they end up adopting in these committees, can't report measures out with a tied vote. There has to be a majority vote to report it out. But the budget, being an important document, generally speaking, has an out clause in the Congressional Budget Act, which says if you're deadlocked on the budget, it doesn't matter. The bill will be automatically discharged from committee consideration by April 1st if the committee hasn't been able to act on it. And that's not the case. There's no such provision for a revised budget resolution. So it's entirely possible, according to this write-up, that a revised budget resolution could be deadlocked in the budget committee. But that's not to say that the full Senate couldn't at some point take up a measure discharging the budget committee from further consideration of the new budget resolution. And, well, let's see. An auto discharge, anyway, as they call it, of a revised budget resolution is not appropriate, McDonough wrote. The practical effect of that stipulation is that the use of a revised budget resolution to push through multiple reconciliation bills is unlikely until the next Congress at the earliest, given the 50-50 Senate split and the evenly divided Senate budget panel. All right. That's because even if Democratic leaders had 51 votes to discharge a revised budget resolution to the floor if a markup results in a tie vote, now we're talking, Republicans could deny Democrats a quorum to vote on the blueprint in committee. Oh, how about that? Committee rules require a majority of budget panel members to be present for a quorum, and proxies don't count toward a quorum. Well, that's just bad rulemaking in the committee, but it was probably a legacy rule carried over and not changed, and they didn't have the majority necessary to change it because they were evenly divided. Even if Budget Chairman Bernie Sanders anticipated such a problem, it would have been difficult to change that rule. The potential for abuse is the next section here. McDonough wrote that lawmakers intended the provision to be used only in, quote, extraordinary circumstances, and not for things that should have been or could have been foreseen and handled in a regular budget resolution. The potential for abuse was clear in 1974 and is all the more obvious now, she wrote. McDonough added that overuse and over-reliance on a hyper-fast-track procedure in the ordinarily deliberative Senate will change the culture of the institution to the detriment of the committee and amendment processes and the rights of all senators. They're afraid it will turn the Senate into the House. Boo-hoo. The House actually works. In a final warning to lawmakers contemplating the use of multiple budget resolutions and reconciliation bills, the parliamentarian wrote that the ability to use the procedure, quote, will depend on adherence to the original purpose of the section and the good judgment and restraint of all involved. Oh, well. McDonough pointed to the language of the conference report on a 1974 law that stipulated that the use of Section 304 to revise a previously adopted budget resolution should be reserved for situations involving, well, what sort of extraordinary circumstances? Well, among them would be, quote, sharp revisions in the revenue or spending estimates or major developments in the economy. And I guess presumably Democrats will want to say, oh, it's all still smooth sailing with the economy, and therefore Republicans will argue there can't possibly be extraordinary circumstances. I don't know if that's how it'll really go down. But, hey, the big meat packing plant is closed. Extraordinary circumstances, maybe that's enough. She also noted the legislative history and public comments from then leaders of the Senate Budget Committee, Edmund Muskie from Maine, Henry Bellman, Republican of Oklahoma, in 1977, when Congress was considering a revised budget resolution to accommodate President Jimmy Carter, there he is again, his economic aid package. Muskie wrote that revised budgets should be the exception and not the rule, and that the purpose should be to meet changed conditions, not to take account of matters which might have been considered in connection with the budget resolution most recently adopted by the Congress. Bellman wrote that the law is flexible enough to permit adjustment when economic or emergency conditions warrant, but the process should not be viewed as being so flexible as to allow for changes whenever an economic statistic moves in an adverse direction. He and his GOP colleagues also wrote that their view was the 1977 measure was intended to be a unique budgetary event that won't need to be repeated in the future. How many times have we heard that? McDonough's opinion answered other questions about the revised budget resolution that could inform the deliberations in future years. She said a Section 304 budget revision would not be restricted in scope or in terms of the reconciliation instructions it could contain. That's of some use. Some budget experts suspected that if an initial budget resolution contained reconciliation instructions to make changes in spending and taxes, for example, then a revised resolution could not include those instructions, but could include instructions to change the debt limit. The opinion said another full set of instructions would be allowed. So that's actually a more liberal interpretation of things. Again, here addressing the question of if there are these 4 permitted types of reconciliation instructions and you've already used one of those types, does it mean that you can't address that same type in a revised budget resolution? And she says, no, that's okay, actually. That's good. Another question was whether just one revised budget resolution would be permitted in a given fiscal year, or if multiple resolutions would be allowed. McDonough said, no reason, though, to believe that Section 304 can't be used, perhaps serially, as it previously has been. That's pretty interesting. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. There's even more to learn about what the parliamentarian had to say about reconciliation. Roll Call, a pretty good publication on these things. The Hill, sometimes better for quick hits. The Roll Call stuff usually gets a little further into the nuance of things like this, so I definitely appreciate it. We left off, though, by saying that McDonough's opinion said that there was no reason to believe that you couldn't use the Budget Act, that is Section 304 of the Budget Act, many times, as they say, perhaps serially, as it previously has been used seriously, to revise the most recently adopted concurrent resolution. So the question of whether or not you could do it 5, 10, 15 times, if you have the time and you've got the votes, can you do it? The answer is yes. That's interesting. I don't know if that'll ever come into play. I doubt very much whether you'll see it all that many times ever, really. But at least we know that answers the hypothetical question. Earlier this year, Senate Majority Leader Schumer began considering the use of revised budget resolutions to give Democrats a second bite at the reconciliation apple, I guess, at reconciliation. They didn't say they. There you go. That's why it doesn't have apple. Second bite at reconciliation, even though that's not something I would bite ever, within the same fiscal year. Yes, sure, of course. Under the expedited procedure, the Senate can pass budget-related legislation with a simple majority rather than the usual 60 votes. Does everyone know why that's the case? I mean, I think so. We've said it 100 times, but it's the sort of thing that reporters, even in roll call, just say, well, that's true. That's the reason why you would use it. And I don't know. That also helps perpetuate the idea that reconciliation and the budget, for that matter, were designed to be specifically filibuster proof. And that's an adequate interpretation of things. But I'm not certain necessarily that they had the filibuster in mind. But they certainly had in mind that it be an efficient and defined process, which is funny given what it's turned into, a free-for-all votorama where anything can happen. But the thing is, it happens in a semi-defined period of time. The Senate has worked its will on the rules over the years and turned it into something that actually is kind of unpredictable, but at the very least, you know that at the end of 50 hours, the opportunity to know what the hell you're voting on, and the fact that voting continues and people are unsure what they're voting on because they literally only have a minute to tell people what the next amendment is. I don't know whether that was an intended outgrowth of the budget process. Probably not. But, everyone has kind of come to think of it as exclusively designed to be filibuster proof. And what it is, of course, that they time limited the debate. It isn't that it was specifically exempted from the filibuster. It's just that they said, look, a budget has to be passed. And no one should be able to stop it with a filibuster because it's kind of important. But also, you can't take forever doing it. This should be a orderly process. 50 hours of debate on the budget resolution should be sufficient. And on reconciliation, I think, what are they, like 20 hours of debate on the actual reconciliation bills? They just basically say enough is enough. That should be plenty of debate. Move on. And then absent the ability to just continue debate forever, because we're talking about a statutory limit on the amount of debate, then it's not that they say no filibusters are allowed. It's that they say debate ends now. And when debate ends, there's only one rule for what does it take to consider a measure passed. And the answer is a majority of those present and voting. That's the default rule in the Senate. The oddball rule is that there should be cloture involved to end debate. So, okay, anyway, just so we know, because that sometimes comes into play, we like to remind everybody of what's really at the bottom of this. McDonough's latest guidance came after a May 20th meeting with Democratic and Republican staff to further discuss the issue following earlier arguments from staff. So I guess that's what brought it back into the news. McDonough told Senate staff in early April that Section 304 budget resolutions may contain reconciliation instructions, but her bare-bones advisory left key questions unanswered, including the scope of reconciliation that would be allowed. How many of the different types can you do? Can you do the same type over again, et cetera, et cetera? Democrats pushed through President Joe Biden's $1.9 trillion COVID-19 relief package in March through reconciliation, allowing them to pass the bill in the 50-50 Senate. Democratic leadership initially mulled following that up with a revised fiscal 2021 budget resolution, which they could move through the Congress before taking up the fiscal 2022 budget resolution. The 1974 budget law allows for a revised budget resolution to be adopted until the end of the fiscal year. For fiscal 2021, that is this coming September 30th. And honestly, in fiscal everything, it is always September 30th. But this coming September 30th is the end of fiscal year 2021, and that year only. But every year on September 30th is the end of a fiscal year. But Democrats had considered using the Section 304 option to move a revised fiscal 2022 budget resolution later in the year or even next year. The fiscal 2021 budget resolution provided reconciliation instructions to increase spending and taxes, but it did not touch on the third option for reconciliation, which is changing the debt limit. Okay, so they number it as 3 rather than 4, and I'm not certain why I thought it was 4, although I guess the only thing I can recall is that at one point there was, one of the reasons was sort of compound, and I suppose you could divide it into 2 reasons. But there you go. Anyway, they mention it as number 3. By the way, changing the debt limit, I don't know whether this was ever addressed in the questions to the parliamentarian or in the answers the parliamentarian gave. Probably not, because now the extraordinary circumstances phrasing is kind of new to this discussion. But how about this? I just want to posit this. What sort of things, the big question is, what would constitute extraordinary circumstances? And let me just throw out the possibility that a Republican hijacking of a debt limit increase would constitute extraordinary circumstances. We've been through this before in recent years, and we know how seriously people take it when the debt limit is hijacked and we look to be about to reach our debt limit, and it's often portrayed as fiscal Armageddon that would require either some sort of sweeping executive action under the inherent powers of the presidency because it's such a serious issue, or the issuance of the platinum $1 trillion coin, or whatever denomination you would put on it, to be deposited in the treasury in order to increase our spending abilities. All sorts of crazy scenarios have been imagined, but crazy scenarios, I guess, imply the seriousness. That's interesting. They're so crazy that it must be a very serious problem at bottom. But that might constitute circumstances extraordinary enough for allowing a budget resolution, a revised budget resolution that contained reconciliation instructions allowing for an increase in the debt limit. And I suppose it's possible that you might be able to then piggyback other reconciliation instructions along with that one if the circumstances were extraordinary enough to move the parliamentarian to rule that a debt limit increase under reconciliation was permissible. I don't know. I guess it depends on the parliamentarian whether they would also then say, well, only the extraordinary circumstances can be addressed, or whether they would allow other circumstances to be addressed as well. Given that it doesn't take any longer to address additional circumstances, whether they're extraordinary or not, the number of hours allowed for consideration of a budget resolution revision and the reconciliation bills that result from it would be exactly the same. So why limit things? I don't know. But they might just say, well, we just don't want you to. We wouldn't want you to, for instance, game the situation and refuse to negotiate with the other side on whatever their objections were to raising the debt limit, just to create these extraordinary circumstances. But I don't know. We've been down that road with reconciliation before. Basically, it was like an extraordinary use, unforeseen, but then later allowed use of reconciliation to use it to cut taxes, when I don't think any of the framers of the Congressional Budget Act ever envisioned the use of reconciliation and the expedited procedures to do something that would damage damage the fiscal picture, I guess, under traditional economic analysis, to cut revenues and throw the budget further into so-called imbalance, if you believe in such a thing. And yet the parliamentarian allowed it to go forward. Well, first they had to fire the parliamentarian they didn't like and get a new one that said it was possible. But you see, I guess what can happen. They're always reshaping reconciliation and always pushing it to the maximum. I know I guess maybe it's supposed to be admirable of McDonough to try to tamp down on such things, but it just ends up, you tie yourself in such a knot, you're just going to end up creating a different area. You relieve the pressure here, but the pressure will burst out somewhere else. It's like squeezing a balloon, right? I tamp down on the abuse of reconciliation over here, squeeze that long balloon, and then the air just moves over and creates pressure elsewhere. And you can't tamp down on it everywhere. That's my metaphor for the budgetary process and the use of reconciliation and the strangulation of the Senate's ability to legislate thanks to stupid mistakes and parlor tricks like the filibuster. Okay, there we go. I think we got that all out there, and I think that was useful. Now, on to stuff that is probably less useful, but still just as interesting because I stuck it in pocket, and so I don't know what else to tell you about it. It must be interesting because it's in there. Sarah Binder was writing about the situation here. I guess maybe we're not done with reconciliation because she put together a tweet thread the other day, which doesn't even look to be all that long, but I'd like to know what she was up to and what she was writing about on the subject. This was June 2nd, just 2 days ago. She tweets out a 4-tweet thread here. An irony of the Senate parliamentarians' guidance from snippets in news stories is her concern about risk of eroding the budget process. The Senate is already adept at shell budgets for the express purpose of generating filibuster-proof reconciliation bills. That's a good point. And she links here to the Hill's coverage of one of the earlier stories on this new guidance and highlights the following from a screen grab. The top, this first paragraph out of 3 paragraphs is highlighted. The parliamentarian warned that allowing for automatic discharge of revisions to the budget resolution out of the budget committee and onto the floor, remember the tied situation in the budget committee, that would risk eroding the budget process, characterizing it as a scenario in which the budget panel would be churning out meaningless stopgap measures or shells for future consideration. That's a thought. That kind of chaos was not at all what was intended with auto discharge. Rather, the purpose of auto discharge is to provide an incentive for the committee's compliance with the law and to provide a remedy when compliance with and through the mandatory processes of the Congressional Budget Act have not been met, she wrote. I'm not certain that sentence made sense the way I read it, but you get the idea. There was, a process for making sure that a budget resolution got to the floor even if there were antics in the committee. Auto discharge is not appropriate for a 304 resolution, McDonough wrote in conclusion, but as Sarah Binder points out, we're not, so far the guidance from parliamentarians on initial budget resolutions have been pretty, I don't know what to say. They've been pretty hinky, I guess, under this view of the rules, given that budget committees in the past have, like I said, adopted shell budgets for the sole purpose of generating a filibuster-proof reconciliation bill, which was the initial reporting on the parliamentarians' new guidance was that she was doing this because it was violative of the original intent of the Congressional Budget Act, that you be able to, just bring a bill under reconciliation for the sole purpose of using its avoidance of the filibuster, as opposed to having a real budgetary need for passing such a bill. Her second tweet in this thread: true, Senate parliamentarian has in mind abuse of Section 304 of the Congressional Budget Act, that is, revisions to the Congressional Budget Resolution. But still, it's important to keep in mind that some of the Congressional Budget Act, what is this? And she loves using these little picture emojis to replace actual words, and I can't tell you what is it she's trying to do here. It's like 2 horses, 2 different horse pictures. Important to keep in mind that some of the CBA horses, have already left the congressional barn. Okay, that's why the horses are in there. All right. One example from fiscal year 21 of shell budgets to circumvent the filibuster, tweeting this as a self-reminder, she says, of congressional or shell budget examples. Another use of a stupid emoji. This a House Budget Committee publication that she links to. The 2021 budget resolution ensures quick action on the American Rescue Plan. And the highlighted bit here says that it allows the use of a fast-track budget reconciliation process. The 2021 budget resolution has a single purpose. It gives Congress the option of using a budget reconciliation measure to get crucial relief to the American people as quickly as possible. And so, I mean, it's already been done. The idea of using reconciliation specifically for its power to avoid the filibuster by being time limited in its debate. Lastly, Sarah tweets, to be sure, the Senate parliamentarian understands thoroughly the extent to which the budget process has been eroded, and she's limiting herself, it appears, to the precise question posed on the use and potential abuse of Section 304, as one expects of the parliamentarian. So Sarah's not offended by the new guidance. I'm not terribly offended by it either. I will point out, though, this is interesting. I wonder why exactly where. Well, maybe she would rethink this at the moment. But I want to point out that we're talking about the Senate parliamentarian making rules for the Senate's consideration of budget resolutions and reconciliation bills. Sarah here has said in the third tweet that one example of the horses already escaping the congressional barn is provided by this House Budget Committee document, which says that the House intends to use reconciliation anyway, specifically for the purpose of getting the coronavirus relief package, the American Rescue Plan, special treatment, debate, time-limited debate treatment, and therefore exemption from the filibuster when they consider it in the Senate. But yeah, what the Senate parliamentarian has to say about how the Senate will consider things doesn't really bear on how the House will consider things, although the House is doing it so that they will be able to take advantage of special rules in the Senate. There is some overlap, obviously, but it's an interesting thing to point to what the House Budget Committee thinks of something by way of illustrating that the horses have already left the barn for the Senate parliamentarian. I don't think the Senate parliamentarian, well, the House Budget Committee doesn't actually care what the Senate parliamentarian has to say about its reasoning. And by the same token, I would think that the Senate parliamentarian should probably not give great weight in deciding, if they're ever called on, say, to decide whether or not this is violative of the newly invented rule that you can't just use reconciliation simply because you want to avoid the filibuster. There has to be, I guess, some underlying fiscal reason to do this, which really basically the Byrd rule takes care of, generally speaking. But this expands things and it goes to the motive of the bill, which it would be interesting to see. I guess what you'll probably see in the future is the House in its budget consideration feeling perfectly free to admit that it wants to make use of the ability of reconciliation to get around the filibuster in that other body. Whether or not that would be persuasive to a Senate parliamentarian in the face of, say, Senate leadership insistence that wasn't the reason that they were using reconciliation. That might be what they're thinking in the House, but it's not what we're thinking here, and you really shouldn't be able to take into consideration what members of the House thought in all of this. They don't have a filibuster. Certainly they were aiming at our filibuster, but if senators right here in front of you, the people whose behavior you're chiefly concerned with regulating, say that's not what we're thinking, we have a totally different reason, what basis would you have for overriding that and saying, no, I will take the word of the members of the House over members of the Senate where I work? That would be an interesting problem. That could get you fired. and replaced with a new parliamentarian. It's not that you gave us an adverse ruling. It's that you're working for the House, or at least you think you're working for the House or in the House. You should care less about what the House says and more about what we say. That will pose an interesting problem. I predict that will become an issue and result in the firing of a parliamentarian, probably under a Republican Senate in the future. How do you like that? Write it down. Don't remember where you put it. And then be sure later on, I knew I wrote this down somewhere. I was so smart. And then be frustrated that you can't find it. That's my wish for you going forward today. Important reminder. Important reminder. I'm dying, apparently. A frog that has crept into my throat is hanging me like Mike Pence. I just can't make it through. That was a weird one. Somebody somewhere didn't want me to remind you. Maybe because it was promoted by Dunkin', which used to be Dunkin' Donuts, but somehow eliminated the donuts from their name, which is ironic given that it is today they're calling it Dunkin' Donut Day. But I think the more inclusive terminology, the formal terminology we all like to use for it, is that it's National Donut Day. I'm sure that there are some of you out there listening saying it could in fact be International Donut Day, maybe even Intergalactic Donut Day. I don't know what goes on in certain parts of the galaxy with respect to the donuts. And look, if you find yourself in a Dunkin' Donuts and they're offering you a free donut, if you will accede to calling it Dunkin' Donut Day, I recommend you go for it and take the donut. But, there is a caveat, apparently, according to the promoted tweet by Dunkin' Donuts, that a beverage purchase is, I guess, the ticket to the free donut. Although very often they say when they're giving away free things like that, the trade regulators say usually you have to have no purchase necessary on things like this. But anyway, today, enjoy a free donut with any beverage purchase at Dunkin', just Dunkin', for National Donut Day. So I guess if you're interested in a beverage and a free donut, or just free things in general, go ahead and do it. I don't know whether anybody else is honoring National Donut Day. I don't know what the law is on National Donut Day. There isn't one, of course. But just for fun, we could speculate. What is the punishment for denying someone a free donut on National Donut Day? You knew what you were getting into when you opened a donut shop. Don't tell me you didn't know there was a National Donut Day. If it wasn't for National Donut Day and the brave soldiers who died to defend it, you wouldn't have the right to have this donut shop to begin with. So give me my free donut. I don't know whether you can do that anywhere. And I guess, obviously, I haven't been appropriately mournful enough for National Donut Day, given the many brave men and women of our country who have given their lives for the right to this donut. So I apologize to those of you who may have family members who died for donuts, national or international. Perhaps they died in the Great War, the war to end the war on all donuts. And don't think I'm not taking that seriously. I'm telling you outright, I'm not doing it. All right, so news to everyone. I got to go out and get a donut. Maybe during this next break. I've only got a minute to go and do that. So, all right. I guess that's where the intergalactic donuts come into it. You can just beam them directly into the studio. All right, a few minutes remain before taking our top of the hour break. I think now we've probably pretty much exhausted the reconciliation thing, but and the audience as well. But I'm glad we got through it all. Let's see. Here's a brief bit we could bring up. I mean, it's a long article, but we don't care about the whole thing. We only care about the top line and making a cheap point. The Los Angeles Times reports COVID-19 restrictions protected California's economy. Now it's poised for a, quote, euphoric rebound. The quote is around euphoric. Rebound, I guess, is just plain fact. Margot Roosevelt is the staff writer behind this one, just from a couple of days ago. California's strict public health measures during the pandemic protected its economy, setting the stage for an even faster recovery in the state than nationwide, UCLA economists reported. Sounds pretty good. The Golden Gate's strong technology and white-collar business sectors, along with a relatively rapid boost in home building, will buoy its economy. offsetting a slower return of tourist-dependent leisure and hospitality jobs, according to the UCLA Anderson quarterly forecast. In the nation and in California, we are about to have one of the best years of economic growth that we've had since World War II, says Leo Feller, the UCLA Anderson forecast's senior economist. We're looking at a boom time for the U.S. economy, and I guess that explains the free donut thing. Emerging from a severe downturn caused by COVID-19 the nation's gross domestic product will spike, they say, 7.1% this year, tapering to 5% in 2022 and 2.2% in 2003. The forecast projects. I don't know what's wrong with 2003. It is a euphoric recovery compared to that, say, following the Great Recession of 2007 and 8, Feller said, thanks to generous pandemic and spending programs enacted by Congress. Thank you, everybody. We never fully bounced back after a tepid response to the great financial crisis, he said. That led to negative economic, political, and social effects, so we learned a lesson. This time we pumped a lot more money into the economy. Very good and sound lesson, I suppose, given that we're now having the same damn battle all over again on infrastructure. I just want to point out, though, for the record, early on in the pandemic, by which I guess I mean 6 months into the pandemic, but not just 3 months into the pandemic, we were all debating whether or not Sweden was taking the correct approach. And as I recall, the Swedish, who took a much more lax approach to lockdown and restrictions, argued that, one, somehow they would be less touched by the pandemic, and two, that they would be less damaged economically as a result from the pandemic. And very early on, they realized, of course, well, geez, we've integrated our economy into the greater European theater here, and they're experiencing tremendous downturns because not only in some places where they do have extreme lockdowns, but they're having extreme problems with death and illness from the pandemic. Anyway, point is they took a totally different approach, and guess what? They are now in the top 10 in terms of the number of infections per million. Didn't work. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. One piece of the puzzle, I guess, missing from that declaration as we made it out to the top of the hour break is that Sweden's economy was, for the most part, no less damaged than much of the rest of Europe, even though they shut down far less of their economy in response to the virus. So they didn't really save themselves that much difficulty economically, and they suffered some pretty severe consequences from the virus. Granted, they've done better on deaths per million than the United States, which is, well, among the worst in the way it handled things in terms of deaths. Certainly, well, tops of the list in terms of raw numbers of infections, but that has to do with the size of our population. But there has been some revision of the numbers from Sweden. The numbers that were most talked about would be from about 6 months into the pandemic, when economists, and I don't know whether they were Swedish economists or not, it could have been, angry rival Norwegian economists, who knows. But I didn't look that far into it. But they looked to have been, dealt more or less the same economic blow as the rest of Europe, and had shut down far less of their economy, but suffered far greater losses among their nursing home population. And eventually, at this point, they really crept all the way back up in the statistics in terms of the number of infections per million, and not so great on the deaths. But infections per million, they sit at, I think, about 9th in the world. Deaths per million, they sit closer to 33rd in the world. But for a relatively small population country, it was a real disaster. On the other hand, I think 6 months or so into the pandemic, they were looking at a contraction of something in the neighborhood of 7 to 8% of GDP, which didn't, stand them in any better stead than any of the rest of Europe. But I think revised numbers have lowered that. So I guess in actuality, with some more data on hand, they revised it to saying that they had lost something closer to 2 to 3% in GDP, which I think, certainly better than certain parts of Europe and maybe better than Europe as a whole. But there are some really, there were some real cratering of local economies in some of the hardest hit sections of Europe. Globally speaking, it's still a greater downturn than most of the world actually faced, but most of the world actually handled the coronavirus considerably better. So I guess that shouldn't be too much of a surprise. Anyway, word is that California will bounce back more quickly. Is there any more that we ought to take out of the LA Times article? Let me just read a little bit more and see what they have to say. Given California's current low coronavirus infection rate and the easing of business restrictions as the state aims to fully reopen by June 15th, Nicholsberg, who are we talking about here? We skipped over this part. Jerry Nicholsberg, forecast director we did mention his name, I guess, at UCLA. Anyway, Nicholsberg said he expects many of those lost jobs to return. Still, the state's unemployment rate is expected to remain higher than the nation's because California is a more entrepreneurial state with a younger population. What do you think of that? People earlier in their career tend to have more unemployment. That you're having no career whatsoever at that point. By the end of this year, the state's unemployment rate will average 5.9% compared with 4.5% in the U.S., according to calculations by Nicholsberg and economist Leila Bengali. California will add new jobs faster than the U.S., sharply narrowing that gap going forward, they predict. By the end of 2023, joblessness in California could be 4% compared with 3.7% overall in the U.S. That is exciting. Aren't you glad we read about that? You're probably staying in place right now. Go ahead and get your donuts. If all you were waiting for was more from the Los Angeles Times, we're now done. We'll move on from the LA Times article and on to other topics. Let's see. A great deal of yelling at Joe Manchin, occupying a great part of Pocket. But honestly, I think we've done kind of enough on that. And not that our frustrations with him have eased any, just that we've all come to grips with the fact that he doesn't seem to be able to absorb or interested in absorbing any of these arguments. So at this point, I don't know what to do with the guy. It doesn't make any sense. Last night he was at it again, and people were admonishing him again, and it's just, he seems dedicated to not budging, and so I guess we'll have to deal with that for the time being. But yeah, it doesn't make any more sense than it ever did. Saying again, reiterating that an infrastructure bill must pass on a bipartisan basis, just for its own sake. He wasn't necessarily commenting on his commitment to refusing to help change filibuster rules, though that seems to be at the bottom of all of this. But he was saying that, for its own sake, it should pass on a bipartisan basis, not simply because a bipartisan vote would be necessary in order to overcome a filibuster. But there's still no explanation as to why that would be the case. Like as if roads didn't work unless Republicans voted for them. I'm still driving on this road, no matter who voted for it. As long as it gets 50 votes or a majority once the vote is on final passage, and the bill is signed and the road gets built, do I care? Is that a kitchen table issue? I guess I won't drive to work today because I recently found out that members of only one party voted for, in favor of constructing this road for whatever reason. And I feel like, I'm abdicating my duty as a patriotic citizen to insist on good fellowship and bipartisanship in these things if I drive on this road. This obviously happens never, right? I won't cross that bridge because one party didn't provide any votes in Congress for the funding of its construction. I won't access high-speed internet here in West Virginia. I'm not in West Virginia, but if I were a constituent of Joe Manchin's, I might say, this bold new project to wire remote parts of West Virginia and with high-speed internet so that they can join the information revolution and I don't know what, sell Beanie Babies on eBay, I guess, and bring economic development to the hollers. Okay, that's the vision anyway. But I won't do it now. I will not avail myself of this availability of high-speed internet because I'm saddened, as my Senator Joe Manchin is saddened, to find that there were no votes from this particular political party on that day for funding of this project. And I just feel un-American accessing the internet as well. It's almost as if he literally lives in our heads, the way we make our kitchen table decisions. And that is absolutely the way most people approach everything. Did members of both parties agree to the funding of this thing? And if not, I'm sorry, it's been built and people have spent blood and treasure to do it. But I just in good conscience, I'm going to have to let this thing rot unused because it didn't get built on a bipartisan basis. I don't know. That seems to be what's motivating him. All right. Well, in case you hadn't gathered, I find that makes no sense, but he's still not going to change his mind, he says. And so I guess we all get to see whether he really will allow nothing to happen and whether he thinks that's something that he'll just be punished for or whether he thinks he can turn it to his advantage and blame Republicans for not doing it and not have his constituents say, you could have done it. We blame you for not doing it. We'll see. I guess I shouldn't be advocating for that because that would likely mean his replacement in the Senate with a Republican, and I would rather not have that, despite the fact that he is of very little use to us as a Democrat. He allows us to organize committees in our favor or in nobody's favor, as the case may be. Okay. Let's see. A couple other items up for consideration, and I just want to thumb through a few of these things. This, I have a couple of longer pieces from good friends from around the internets that I think might make interesting reading. I'm a little hesitant to jump into what Empty Wheel had been writing a couple of days ago, but it had a very intriguing headline. But sometimes reading an Empty Wheel post alone and out of context is a little more confusing than you'd think because, well, she refers to all of her old posts, but does so in with a lot of her own jargon as well. But I was intrigued with this headline from back on May 30th. Rudy Giuliani's alleged, quote, cooperation, I didn't even know there was any, is a threat to lay out how Bill Barr and Jeffrey Rosen protected Russian disinformation. Is that intriguing to you or just confusing to you? I didn't know what cooperation was going on or being threatened, but I thought I would dive into this and find out. Will it take us forever to do? Not too bad. A good portion of it is comments here. Now that I've waded through Rudy Giuliani's response to learning, as we didn't really discuss this on the show, but perhaps you saw the news. Now that I've waded through Rudy Giuliani's response to learning that the Southern District of New York had conducted a covert search on him in November of 2019, before it conducted an overt search in April of 2021, the one we all noticed, I'm certain Rudy engaged in just the kind of bad lawyering that the Southern District of New York hoped he would. More on that in a week or so, and I guess it's about time that we should be expecting more. And I think there is more in the news these days. Let's see. But a big part of his letter was not an attempt to engage in good lawyering, but instead to send messages to a variety of people. He provided co-conspirators a map that they can use to understand which of their communications are in Southern District of New York's hands, or SDNY. We'll just go with that. And which are not. But he also laid out what he called his cooperation, which aside from minimal claims, which SDNY disputed to have cooperated with SDNY against Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman, really amounts to the corrupt stuff he believed he was protected for because he did it on behalf of Donald Trump. Indeed, he claims that if Judge Paul Oetken only knew he had permission to do all this stuff, then he wouldn't have approved warrants against him. Aha, okay, that's interesting thinking. And then I guess a quote from his letter. And the problem with reading an empty wheel post in isolation is it assumes that all of the news on the subject is already in evidence. And I mean, it's been introduced, but not on the show necessarily. I don't know if we have all read the background on this, but let's see. His letter, which I really should be finding news articles about rather than... she points directly to the letter, but also the letter will give us no extra context either. It is unknown if the government informed the court of Giuliani's cooperation with the State Department or his offers to cooperate with the SDNY or his actual cooperation with Western District of Pennsylvania. Okay. That's direct from the letter. But I guess I gather from this that Rudy is arguing with the judge over what? Specifically, I'm not sure, but generally speaking, saying there should not have been warrants approved for searching my home and office because I was doing the bidding of the then sitting president. I was working with official arms of the government and therefore should be essentially immune from prosecution for these things. But also claiming that I guess he's cooperating somehow with prosecutors. But to what end, I don't know, and even what he hopes to get out of the news that he's cooperating. Let's see. Perhaps I jump back to one of the articles she references here to try to give us some better context. I should have done this ahead of time. I knew what I was getting into when I read her name on the post, but I put it away in pocket, maybe as just a hint to go and read some of these other original news stories. She's referring here to just, I think to bring ourselves up to speed so that we can understand her analysis. We need this part of the story. This comes from back on May 1st. FBI was aware prominent Americans, including Giuliani, were targeted by Russian influence operation. Okay, we all read that news some time ago, and I guess this is, the law enforcement community's response to that is, all right, let's go grab his computer and his documents. Whereas Giuliani's response to it is, of course I was targeted by Russian intelligence operations. I was working for the U.S. government. They always are targeting our activities. And everybody else reminding him, well, at best, you appeared to be the private lawyer for Donald Trump, and you weren't even getting paid for that. But being his private attorney doesn't actually give you any status as a U.S. government attorney or U.S. government operative at all, and that protection probably just isn't available to you. I think that actually might help get us up to speed in all of this. Let's see. This is almost certainly the meat of the SDNY investigation, Marcy continues. And whatever else Rudy has done by invoking it, he has put Mike Pompeo on the hot seat because of his claim to have been working with the State Department. And I guess they'll want to ask the former head of the State Department, was Rudy Giuliani working for you? And if so, why was he busy telling everybody that he wasn't working for you, but was in fact private attorney for Donald Trump? And the answer is he probably did consider himself the private attorney, but like Trump, he has issues conflating the private and the public and can't tell the difference. It may not be a coincidence that in the wake of this letter, Gordon Sondland sued Mike Pompeo for covering up what really happened in State Department in 2019 and provided several excuses, Most importantly, that Pompeo refused to let him access his own backup materials before testifying, for why his 2 existing sessions of sworn testimony might conflict with what SDNY seized from Rudy. In his other claim of cooperation, Rudy detailed how he shared disinformation from Russian agent Andrei Derkach with DOJ, which he described as cooperation with Maine Justice in the guise of its delegate, Pittsburgh U.S. Attorney Scott Brady. Before I repeat Rudy's description of how he shared disinformation from Andrei Derkach with a hand-picked and very pro-Trump U.S. attorney, consider several details first, she says. First, immediately in the wake of the raid on Rudy in April, there were leaked explanations for how Rudy managed to meet with a known Russian agent right in the middle of impeachment, even though both National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien and the FBI's counterintelligence folks knew that Russia was feeding Derkach disinformation to feed to Rudy. Okay, the Washington Post originally reported that the FBI had warned Rudy, but had to retract that. Rudy never got warned. Okay. It says here, a correction in the Washington Post piece that we were talking about, an earlier version of this story, published Thursday, incorrectly reported that One America News was warned by the FBI, OAN, warned by the FBI that it was the target of a Russian influence operation. That version also said the FBI had provided a similar warning to Giuliani, which he has since disputed. This version has been corrected to remove assertions that OAN and Giuliani received the warnings. The FBI became aware in late 2019 that Giuliani was the target of a Russian influence operation aimed at circulating falsehoods intended to damage President Biden politically ahead of last year's election, according to people familiar with the matter. Officials planned to warn Giuliani as part of an extensive effort by the Bureau to alert members of Congress and at least one conservative media outlet, OAN, that they faced a risk of being used to further Russia's attempt to influence the outcome of the election, said several current and former U.S. officials. All spoke on condition of anonymity because reasons. The FBI became aware of the Russian information operation at a time when Giuliani was deeply involved with former President Trump's 2020 re-election campaign and related activities in Ukraine to surface unflattering or incriminating information about the Biden family. And then later on in the article, in late 2019, before Giuliani's trip to Kyiv, U.S. intelligence agencies warned the Trump White House that Giuliani was the target of a Russian influence operation, as the Post reported last year. Officials became concerned after obtaining evidence, including communications intercepts, that showed Giuliani was interacting with people tied to Russian intelligence. The warnings led then National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien to caution Trump that any information Giuliani brought back from Ukraine should be considered contaminated by Russia. Okay. And we know what Trump did with it. He said, who cares? I'll take it. And then he got impeached. All right. Then after matching the Washington Post's original story and similarly having to retract it, NBC offered an explanation as to why Rudy wasn't given that briefing. The answer, I guess, is because it would complicate what NBC called the criminal investigation into Rudy. The FBI prepared a so-called defensive briefing for Rudy Giuliani in 2019, in which agents were poised to warn him he was being targeted by a Russian intelligence influence operation as he sought to gather opposition research on the Biden family. But that briefing was not given, according to a second source, because of concerns that the briefing could complicate the criminal investigation into the former New York City mayor. Yet at the time Rudy would have gotten this warning, Marcy continues, SDNY had already shown probable cause Rudy was an agent of one or another pro-corruption Ukrainians, almost certainly Yuri Lutsenko, in his efforts to fire Marie Yovanovitch. Without a Derkach angle to the SDNY investigation, an angle Jeffrey Rosen went to great lengths to prevent them from pursuing, it's not clear how it would have complicated that investigation. Rudy didn't get his warning, and instead of warning him, Trump said that Rudy was being Rudy. So Rudy first met with Lutsenko, the subject of the first investigation, and headed from that meeting directly to meet with Derkach. A month later, Rosen, and you remember who Rosen was? He was the high-ish ranking DOJ official in the final days of the administration who apparently went to Trump with a proposition that he fire everybody in the DOJ who outranked him and make him the acting attorney general, and then he would take care of everything. Okay. So a month after this plays out with Rudy, Rosen issued a memo prohibiting any prosecutors from expanding the scope of their already opened investigations, which would have had the effect of preventing SDNY from investigating Rudy's ongoing influence peddling for known agent Andrei Derkach, about whom the FBI decided not to warn Rudy, even though everyone briefed on it knew he was a Russian intelligence operative. But that wasn't the only thing that Bill Barr and Rosen's efforts to divvy up Ukrainian investigations did. After Rosen wrote that memo ensuring that no one could start an investigation into Rudy's dalliances with Derkach, but still a week before Trump was acquitted for coercing dirt from Ukraine and using it against Joe Biden, per Rudy's timeline, Barr assigned Pittsburgh U.S. Attorney Scott Brady to oversee intake of all Ukrainian dirt. And within a day, Rudy was in the business of sharing Derkach's dirt directly with the Pittsburgh U.S. Attorney's Office. In his letter, Rudy clearly identifies 4 of the 9 people who rushed to accept Rudy's dirt, which the government had identified as Russian disinformation before he went to collect it in December. Wow. In January of 2020, counsel for Giuliani contacted high officials in the Justice Department to inform them that Giuliani wanted to provide evidence for their consideration about Ukraine. Within a day, the United States Attorney for the Western District of Pennsylvania, Scott Brady, contacted Giuliani's counsel and offered to hold a meeting in Pittsburgh with both the U.S. Attorney's Office personnel and the FBI. Giuliani immediately accepted, and the meeting was scheduled for January 29th, 2020. On January 29th, 2020, Giuliani and his counsel flew to Pittsburgh at their own cost, where they were met by agents of the FBI and transported to FBI headquarters in Pittsburgh. Present at the meeting were the U.S. Attorney, the First Assistant United States Attorney, the Chief of the Criminal Division, and 2 additional Assistant United States Attorneys from the Western District of Pennsylvania. The FBI was represented by the Special Agent in charge of the Pittsburgh FBI, the Assistant Special Agent in charge, and 3 other special agents of the FBI, all very special. Prior to the meeting, Giuliani's counsel had provided the Pittsburgh U.S. Attorney's Office with documents and an extensive outline of the subject matter to be discussed so that the government could be fully informed and prepared to ask probing questions. Giuliani began the meeting by making a presentation with handouts. During his presentation and at the end of it, the mayor and his counsel answered every question they were asked to the apparent satisfaction of all of the government officials in the room. In addition to the presentation, Giuliani provided the government with the names and addresses of individual witnesses, both in the U.S. and Ukraine, that would corroborate and amplify the information the mayor was providing. Subsequent to that meeting and covering a period of months, counsel for Giuliani received a number of inquiries, discussions, and requests from the First Assistant United States Attorney. All requests were granted, and all inquiries were answered. And, as Rudy tells it, that First Assistant U.S. Attorney kept coming back for more, a claim, like his other claims about the personnel involved, that matches the story published in the New York Times after those involved knew that Trump had lost. That story also described that Brady kept pushing for inappropriate investigative steps until ultimately Seth Ducharme had to get involved. Oh, I didn't even know about that. Which article is she referring to here? I just want to open up the New York Times piece. Material from Giuliani spurred a separate Justice Department pursuit of Hunter Biden. Oh, boy. Okay. Let's see. And then more quotes from that article. Yeah, you know what, though? I got to tell you, after all of this, I'm not certain I'm getting anywhere in understanding where we are on the Giuliani front. I thought that, Marcy certainly knows better than anybody where we are, but I guess the upshot here, unfortunately, is diving into her timeline to figure it out at any given point. Once again, just proves to be kind of counterproductive, and the better response, I guess, to wanting to catch up on things is, in fact, to speak to the less informed, I suppose. Maybe our brains just aren't up to absorbing all of what she's revealing here without having followed all the way through it. So, okay, unfortunately, that's a big chunk of the show that I thought we were going to get down to the bottom of something that was a little easier to understand and digest, and I apologize that isn't the case. Hopefully you didn't fall asleep during all of that, and maybe we can revive things for the last segment. We're going to have to jump out of this, although maybe in the 2 minutes intervening in between segments, I can find some news reports that'll help redeem the prior segment. But if not, hey, something new. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning. I have good news to report. Many more listeners like you are making critical contributions that keep our show on the air. Makes good sense, of course, and patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple. Now you can make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for helping keep you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all of your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Yes, I'm going to have to steer things away, although one direction that I did want to explore a little bit, and I think here we've probably read along on your own about developments with, arrests of the various insurrectionists of January 6th. There's some great Twitter accounts out there that track who's been arrested and who's been identified of late. But a couple of other items, I think, of interest in terms of the investigation. One, a weird one that happened across my desk a couple of days ago. The reporter here is Ben Wermund, the Washington correspondent for the Houston Chronicle, who notes that, I guess probably to no one's surprise, Texans lead the nation in the number of arrests for storming the Capitol on January 6th, with, at the time of this tweet, which was May 26th, the 44th arrested person arrested on Tuesday of that week. Some were caught on camera inside and little else. Others are accused of wielding tomahawks, a skateboard, and more as they fought their way in. So, I don't know. I just found that kind of interesting. And I guess it stands to reason just by way of population. And, of course, Texas has kind of been a home to sometimes the craziest of the crazy, although Florida definitely vying for that title. But there you have it. I just thought that was sort of an interesting note in all of this. And on that front, let's see, news today. I've seen Mike Pence in his picture and comments about his latest comments on the issue circulating. I guess he continues to say, let's say understatedly, that he's talked to Trump a number of times since then and since they left office, and gosh, it looks like they just won't see eye to eye on how to regard the events of January 6th. And that's all he can bring himself to say about the activists that Trump whipped into a frenzy such that they were ready to hang Mike Pence. He's just going to be irredeemable on that. But in case you were interested in just how sort of disconnected Mike Pence is from reality, I mean, we all have gotten the sense of how disconnected Donald Trump is, given the reporting over the last couple of days that he insists that he's going to be reinstated sometime either in August or before August. And we all marvel at either how disconnected he is or how there are still people just learning that he's disconnected from reality. And I guess, I don't know, there's some half-hearted, anyway, I think half-hearted efforts out there to maybe redeem Mike Pence in some way, because even as ridiculous as he is and not recognizing that Trump wanted him murdered, that in the end, he did the right thing. He wouldn't knuckle under to what Trump wanted, and there's pushback. Well, he couldn't have done what Trump wanted, but that doesn't matter. I mean, the application of law at this point don't even use it as a reference point. There is something to be said for the fact that Pence didn't want to participate in all this, but that doesn't help me reach the conclusion that Mike Pence is either certainly not a good person, and whether or not he's connected to reality, or whether he can read the tea leaves correctly, that seems out of the question. I mean, he was threatened with murder, and he just doesn't seem to get it. I think, generally speaking, he's not good at understanding the evidence of what's going on around him, and there's this weird story that doesn't relate, I don't think, to the insurrection, but maybe it does. I don't know. But just to sort of illustrate, I don't know what, that there's really literally nothing going on in that idiotic pumpkin that he carries around on his shoulders. Here's a weird story. Like, how would you not recognize that you were getting into dangerous territory with something like this? Unless it was intentional and you're actually, like, actively evil, as opposed to just plain dopey and sycophantic. But we didn't discuss this story when it happened. It's a couple of weeks old here at this point, but David Korn reporting for Mother Jones. I don't know what's the date. How come there's no obvious date line on this thing? I don't know, but he's reporting on events from early May. Pence and, there's the date line. They just format it weird. May 20th of this year, but based on events from earlier in the month. Pence and Pompeo headlined an event mounted by a group that says the, quote, Christian era has ended, unquote. And, by the way, the subheader says they won't say if they were paid for their speeches. But that seems like an odd affiliation for people like Pence and Pompeo, who sort of depend on this idea that they are going to be able to help themselves to some part of evangelical Christian support, which right now is pretty much in Trump's thrall. Now, why they would be able to avail themselves of that if he claims it for himself, I don't know. And why they thought, yeah, sure, I should go hang out with people who say things like the Christian era is over. But then sometimes, they present themselves to you as big boosters of evangelical Christendom, and you say, I'll therefore participate. And then it turns out that they are weirdos or liars, and you never find out about the other things that they say elsewhere. But let's see how David Korn puts it together. On May 8th, former Vice President Mike Pence and former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo headlined a virtual rally, so they didn't see anybody around them. They did it by video, I guess, organized by an offshoot of the Unification Church. You know them, the Moonies, as they hate to be called, I think. A controversial religious movement known for holding mass weddings of its adherents that has been accused of being a cult. Though American conservatives have long made common cause with the Unification Church, the head of the outfit that pulled together this event declared, not too long ago, that the, quote, Christian era had ended. That might be exciting news for some of you, which means Pence and Pompeo, whose self-professed religious devotion is a prominent part of their respective political profiles, were, knowingly or not, collaborating with and bolstering a group that says it is supplanting the Christianity they embrace. But you will not replace us, however. So there you go. The event, called the Rally of Hope, was hosted by Hak Ja Han Moon, the head of the Unification Church, whose members consider her and her late husband, Sun Myung Moon, the Messiahs, and sponsored by the Universal Peace Federation, a group co-founded by the Moons in 2005 and affiliated with the Unification Church, which now refers to itself as the Unification Movement. Interesting. According to the UPF, the gathering put on before a socially distanced audience and supposedly streamed to 1 million people in 194 nations, was held to launch a project called Think Tank 2022, which aims to reunify the Korean Peninsula. Big pet project for Trump, right? The UPF says this new outfit is a global multi-sector network of more than 2,000 experts in business, academia, and other fields, though Think Tank 2022 does not yet have much or any, in fact, online presence. Still, Hak Ja-han Moon was able to draw an impressive amount of star power for this kickoff, with the event featuring speeches from Pence, Pompeo, Newt Gingrich, former Defense Secretary Mark Esper, past UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, oh dear, I forgot about that, former Republic of Korea Prime Minister Chung Se-kun, I don't know, I'm probably murdering these names here, and Zanzibar President Hussein Ali Mwinyi. Maybe I got that right. Also among the speakers were Jonathan Falwell, a pastor at Thomas Road Baptist Church in Virginia, and yes, son of Jerry Falwell, the founder of the Moral Majority. Another featured participant was Hun Sen, the dictatorial longtime leader of Cambodia, who has amassed a horrific human rights record. Wow. The 3-hour-long event was a celebration of both moons, with Hak Ja-han Moon referred to as the Mother of Peace and Heavenly Parent. During his videotaped speech, Pence claimed that Think Tank 2022 is, quote, bringing the wisdom of leaders in government, business, religion, and civil society, and that thanks to this new endeavor, the dream of peaceful cooperation and unity will be closer to reality than ever before. Pence spoke at a previous and similar rally of hope in March. So it's a second go-round with these guys. Pompeo, who was introduced as a, quote, devout Christian, hailed former President Donald Trump's assorted engagement with Kim Jong-un, the tyrannical and murderous leader of North Korea. We tried something different, Pompeo said. Foreign policy specialists have tended to note that Trump's overly palsy overtures, that's interesting, to Kim yielded no true progress. Gingrich praised the Moons, the Universal Peace Federation, Think Tank 2022, and the Washington Times, the conservative paper that Sun Myung Moon founded. Don't forget that. Esper noted that Hak Ja-han Moon has been working to help strengthen America's role in the world. He didn't elaborate on what he meant by that. The rally ended with a ceremony that was staged to look like an official act. A color guard brandishing the flags of nations from around the world marched about. Then Hak Ja-han Moon came out to receive the, quote, historic resolution establishing Think Tank 2022. She signed this document and then struck a gong to declare the project launched. It's unclear what this thing is actually doing. The group does not seem to have a website. A week after the rally, the project was not mentioned on the homepage of the Universal Peace Federation. Mother Jones sent Larry Moffat, a spokesperson for UPF, an email with a list of questions regarding the think tank. Who are its 2,000 experts? Who's running the operation? How much funding does it have? The email also asked if Pence, Pompeo, Esper, Gingrich, and others who spoke at the rally were paid for their participation. Reached by phone, Moffat would say that he would look at the email and get back, and he did not. Pence, Pompeo, Gingrich, and Esper didn't respond to any questions either. The unification movement has long sought to cultivate allies among Washington power brokers, particularly on the right. That was presumably one motivation for Sun Myung Moon in 1982 in establishing the Washington Times, which has long been a mouthpiece for Republicans and conservatives. In 2004, he managed to hold a bizarre crowning ceremony for himself and his wife within a Senate office building. I remember this. During which he declared in Korean that he was the Messiah. Presidents and kings, he said, had declared to all heaven and earth that Reverend Sun Myung Moon is none other than humanity's savior, Messiah, returning Lord, and true parent. Some members of Congress who attended the event, which was sponsored by the Washington Times Foundation, insisted they had been duped. I remember all about that, and yet people continue to get duped. The relationship between the right and the unification movement has long been curious. Much of it has likely been influenced by the Washington Times and its standing as a dependable conservative outlet, but the theology pushed by the Moons and their devotees challenged the basic Christianity embraced by so many conservatives. The Moons' claims to be the Messiah, of course, runs counter to mainstream Christianity, and one unification tenet promoted by a senior person in the movement is that Christianity is essentially over. In a 2017 video, Michael Jenkins, a main player in the unification movement's cosmos of nonprofits and businesses, those networks of interlocking directorates of nonprofits, a major tactic developed by and for the benefit of Newt Gingrich himself, so no stranger to this phenomenon, and he's a willing participant as well, because it pays him money probably to maintain his own network of interlocking nonprofits. Anyway, where were we? In a 2017 video, Jenkins said the Christian era has ended. Jenkins is the president of the Universal Peace Foundation, which hosted the Rally for Hope and created this think tank. He's also president of the Washington Times Foundation that pays for all this crap and paid for the original one that took place in the Senate office building, too. According to its latest tax filing, that foundation raised $242,203 in 2019 and only handed out $2,595 in contributions. It spent most of the balance on salaries and other administrative expenses, including a $93,400 salary for Moffitt, the spokesman, who's also vice president of the foundation. The video recorded Jenkins, we should call him Leroy, I guess, right? Michael Leroy Jenkins. All right. The video recorded Jenkins giving a talk at the Unification Church in Columbus, Ohio, in which he quoted Mother. That's what the attraction is for Pence. In this case, not Mrs. Pence, but Hak Jahan Moon, saying Christianity failed. That's going to go over big. He noted that she had proclaimed the New Testament era is over, the Christian era has ended. He suggested that the Unification Church is in the process of replacing Christianity. Consequently, Pence and Pompeo contributed their celebrity to an effort mounted by a movement that appears to consider Christianity kaput. The video was originally obtained by Warren Throckmorton, a professor at Grove City College in Pennsylvania, who writes a blog that covers religious issues. Moffitt didn't respond to any request for comment from Mother Jones or from Jenkins. Didn't get anything from Jenkins either. Let's see. Pence and Pompeo's appearances at the rally were much appreciated by the Universal Peace Federation, which released a celebratory press release noting that world-class leaders had affirmed and enhanced the concept of Think Tank 2022. But if one goal was to garner media attention in the U.S. for this venture through the participation of Pence, Pompeo, Gingrich, and others, the Federation fell short. It seems the only major American media outlet that covered the event was the Washington Times. Gee whiz, what a surprise. I don't know. That seemed kind of weird and like a story that I would like to have on the record at some point. I mean, very little ever comes to fruition with the Unification Church people, but I just thought it was kind of an interesting thing. The connection between Pence and Pompeo and this Jenkins guy who declares on behalf of the Moons that the Christian era is over is very tenuous, but more to the point is this weird ability that the Unification Church has to continue to pull in big names who should have better screening and vetting in place, but to do so repeatedly such that you get to the point where you begin to realize this has to be happening intentionally and they can't be, permitted to pretend that they didn't know what they were doing. All right. A couple other stories we might be able to squeeze in here. I mentioned to you the other day that Georgia appeared to be going down the weird fake audit path just the way that Arizona was. There was also mentioned in the news the other day that a delegation of state legislators from Pennsylvania had come to visit the audit site and speak to people in the Arizona State Senate about how they might be able to spark a similar fake audit in their own state. And in addition to this, I will add this observation from Stephen Fowler, a reporter covering Georgia politics. He tweeted this just yesterday morning: not going away. A group of 500 plus Georgia Republicans, including gubernatorial candidate Vernon Jones, has sent an open letter to Governor Kemp asking for what? A forensic audit. That enclosed in quotes, of course, because we don't know what the hell it means, but that's their triggering word. A forensic audit of the 2020 election. Ask any election expert, though, and they'll tell you a forensic audit isn't a thing. So there you go. There's the letter is reprinted here, but I imagine it's just a batch of crazy and gobbledygook. But I'll include the tweet for you in the roundup today, and you can read the letter. Fowler continues by saying the Georgia Star report about missing chain of custody of absentee drop boxes just isn't true. Only 3 small rural counties don't have the forms. The Fulton absentee lawsuit is an inspection on hold and not an audit. And I guess here means you got to read through all of this letter. But I guess the claims that they're making in their letter are untrue. And I guess in that case, perhaps it is best if we read the letter first. An open letter to the people of Georgia. We hear you. We hear your concerns, your frustrations, and your fears about how the 2020 election was carried out in our great state. That is why we are calling for a statewide forensic audit of every single ballot. Wow. You deserve to know the truth about your election. As American citizens, you have the right to vote. And, well, do you? You have the right to vote, and you have a right to know that your vote was counted, or how that your vote counted. Unfortunately, many in Georgia did not have that luxury last year. It's not a right, it's a luxury now. Elected officials in both parties mishandled the 2020 presidential election, and as a result, the integrity of that election is in question. It isn't. Now, why, more than 6 months later, are hundreds of thousands of absentee ballots missing legally required chain of custody documents? Answer, they're not. The Georgia Star News published a damning report on May 18th that revealed, quote, officials at the state and county levels in Georgia have failed to produce chain of custody records for more than 333,000 absentee votes by mail ballots deposited in drop boxes located around the state for the 2020 election. Approximately 5 million people in our state voted last year, and President Joe Biden won with fewer than 12,000 votes. They did say he won. That is why it is so important for us to have a statewide audit. Only a handful of votes could have swayed the election either way. In Fulton County alone, officials have, quote, failed to produce complete chain of custody documents for 18,901 vote-by-mail absentee ballots deposited by voters into drop boxes. Even that seemingly small number of votes could have potentially flipped our state's election in favor of President Donald Trump, and if he won every single one of them, of course. And to complicate matters further, Fulton County's own records are apparently flawed. The Georgia Star News reported on May 20th that county officials provided 2 different versions of 34 completed critical chain of custody documents for absentee ballot drop boxes from the November election. How can we trust the validity of our election when officials from one of our largest and most well-funded counties cannot keep their own records straight? Even the courts are beginning to weigh in. And that's why it's dangerous to do this stuff. On May 21st, a judge ruled 145,000 absentee ballots in Fulton County could be unsealed for an audit. We know for a fact that audits work in detecting discrepancies. We don't know that. In Arizona, elected officials began an audit, which it isn't, of votes from the 2020 election in Maricopa County, a county that holds more than half of the state's population. According to a letter from Arizona State Senate President Karen Fann, there were several discrepancies between the actual number of ballots contained in batches and the total denoted in the pink report slip accompanying batches. She added that in most cases, the total on the pink report slip is greater than the number of ballots in the batch. To be clear, an audit is a very different thing than a recount. An audit is a review of the ballots to ensure legal votes were accurately counted and ensure that proper procedures were followed in the election process. We believe that anyone who has a problem with the statewide forensic audit in Georgia has something to hide. Our goals are simple. We want to discover the underlying problems that occurred last year and ensure we never make those same mistakes again. In America, we hold elections so that the people can determine the trajectory of our nation. Not anymore. We understand that you are rightfully worried that your voices did not matter in determining our current trajectory. We stand with you, and we will continue to voice your concern until our elected leaders listen. We must eliminate the vulnerabilities in our election system and restore confidence for the people. If we fail to do this, our constitutional republic and the freedoms we hold dear are at stake. And that's why we, the undersigned, call for Governor Brian Kemp, through the use of his prescribed powers as governor, to allow for an independent forensic audit to take place through the convening of a special session. So, what does Stephen have to say about this stuff? As I mentioned before, the Georgia Star, and it's enclosed in quotes. Is that not a real newspaper? I don't know. Their report about a missing chain of custody of absentee drop boxes just isn't true. Only 3 small rural counties don't have the forms. I guess Fulton is fine. The Fulton absentee lawsuit is an inspection, which is currently on hold, not an audit, forensic or otherwise. Average people don't understand how elections work. That's probably true. A growing number of Republicans have now learned an incorrect idea/concept of how elections work, and Georgia's too politically divided at the moment to make any headway on either group, it seems. A very excellent and timely piece from Miles Parks explains this even more. He encloses his, or attaches his tweet on it, which says, grab some quotes from it: a clown show, a waste of taxpayer money, performance art, all ways that former DHS official Matt Masterson described what's going on in Arizona right now, but he also called it a game plan, and it's playing to a very specific audience. That a report on NPR. Fowler continues here by saying, here's a different take from fringe GOP gubernatorial candidate Candace Taylor. Candace is Kandiss, by the way, whose first paragraph is correct, and then it veers odd from there. Candace tweeting, posting on Facebook, want to know what open letters with voter signatures do to get a forensic audit in Georgia? Nothing. Excites false hope and wastes our time. Pandering at best. So that's the part that's apparently correct. We need affidavits and notices. Totally different. Go to CandiceTaylor.com, save Georgia, and do the steps. We demand a forensic audit in Georgia now. Don't waste time with politicians trying to ride coattails, whatever that's supposed to mean. And so go to her list building exercise and sign up with their list, not this other list, because those guys don't know how to get a forensic audit. Okay, sure. Phew. Man, it's getting kind of crazy out there. All right, not much time left here. Don't know whether we have to get to anything else here. Dave R. asking the important question, is it National Donut, D-O-N-U-T Day, or the more formal National D-O-U-G-H-N-U-T Day? That's a good question. If you're making a formal proclamation, it seems like you're going to want the full-on spelling, D-O-U-G-H, but I'm not certain that everybody would understand exactly what we meant by this. One more little story I guess I'll toss out before the alarm rings. I'll begin it before the alarm rings anyway. Keep an eye on this thing. Down in Florida, again, DeSantis onto something else, but actually doing something that might be a good idea and that he plans, I'm sure, to take credit for. I guess watch how he takes credit for it in the election, because Democrats could be doing the same and aren't. DeSantis signs Florida budget that includes $1,000 checks for teachers and first responders. That reported by The Hill the other day. Lexi Lonis reporting this story. What's up with this? Well, $1,000 payments to teachers and first responders as part of the $101 billion state budget, an increase of more than $9 billion from the previous year, but more than 175,000 teachers and 3,000 principals, along with first responders, will be receiving a $1,000 check as part of the spending plan. The budget also allocates, lots of other good monies in there for education. Why did they do this? The governor vetoed money that the legislature had set aside for Oh, we have to play our outro music. We almost forgot. We'll run a little long today. Sorry, Justice. The governor vetoed money that the legislature had set aside for future budget issues, and instead, I guess, is handing out this money. And there's literally in this piece no explanation given. It's just, well, they're teachers and first responders, so of course. And it's interesting, considering how hard Republicans fought at the national level and later on some of the state levels against any sort of stimulus checks for anybody who actually needed it. And then, of course, opposed all of it, and then anything that was getting done in the states, whether it was direct assistance or infrastructure projects that were being funded, then went around and claimed credit for it, even though they had voted against it. But this is, I don't know, this is as naked a thing as I've ever seen. Just direct payment checks without any justification given, and he'll just walk around and say, I'm the one who gave $1,000 checks to first responders and teachers, and people will say that's a great idea, which it is. It's fine. It's just interesting that Democrats who have actually done it and done it for many more people, and many people who had a more demonstrated and more immediate need, aren't doing any of the work to tell people that they actually did this thing. And it's very odd, considering how they love saying they're focusing on kitchen table issues. I don't know. Seems like an issue for a kitchen table. If you've got one, let me know.
From networksradio.com, you have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Kitchen table things. If you've got a kitchen table, let me know. If you get one of these checks, let me know. I'd be very interested to see how they get distributed. Of course, next up, the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam. I have delayed things long enough. I will simply let him take it away and take you on his usual esoteric tour around the country and around the world next. And we'll see you next week.